Welcome back to the Change Physician Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Melissa Cady, joined by my co-host, Dr. Kevin Cuccaro, and we're joined with two guests this time, Dr. Sara and Colin Taylor out of Canada, and we are just excited to hear the stories of not only your individual stories, but how they merged in this medical realm and this whole trajectory it's taken, because we know it's not stayed the same. As the podcast reveals, it's about the change physician. So thank you for joining the podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So let's start with let's start with Sara. And can you tell us or the audience, what was your whole inspiration or reason for going into medicine in the first place?
Well, I didn't really have a story of growing up thinking I wanted to be a doctor. I knew I liked science, went into a Bachelor of Science program, and I did biology and psychology and wasn't sure what path I would actually take. Had a lot of encouragement from my father in particular. Not that he is a physician, but he really wanted me to become one. So, I wasn't sure if it would turn out or not. By second year, I wrote my MCAT, ended up getting in, and so I didn't take the psychology route. And so really that's kind of how I ended up there. It was just kind of an organic route to medicine.
And in Colin, what about you? Same thing or different?
A little bit similar to start. Again, I wasn't sure what I really wanted to do. I knew I wanted to go to university. I knew that I liked sciences. Probably the difference for me was I was kind of my own driving force. And there was one a guy that was in my year who actually focused on it and was kind of probably my lead or guide to becoming interested in it as a possibility. So then at the end of again, second year, I wrote my MCAT and it just kind of went from there. So I was probably, I guess, inspired by one of my classmates, really.
So where did you go to medical school, or what made you choose, the particular place? Or I'm not sure how it works there.
Yeah. Well, we both finished our undergrad degree, Bachelor of Science, and applied, and as many people, it depends on where you get in. So we have a lot fewer medical schools in Canada. And we were applying in 94. So that was before the days where it was probably really easy to just apply online. So you kind of had to be a bit dedicated. So we actually both went to Western in London, Ontario. My sister had gone to dental school there, and I really loved the city, and it's a very university city. So that's where we both ended up.
Yeah, I mean, similarly, the classmate that I was referring to, that's where he ended up. So again, it was kind of, he loved it there, and that was kind of a lead for me to apply there, and it just worked out. So
great. So go ahead, Kevin.
I was going to say, so now you guys don't know each other yet, right? That's the other thing is important is, so this whole pathway is happening. You guys are independently applying for medical school, and then you both end up at Western. And what happens next? So when did your guys' paths intersect on this journey?
So it was actually the very first day of kind of med school activity. So classes hadn't started yet. The class was getting together for an orientation. And then of course there were other activities related to that. So during one of those activities, we kind of, I think, probably noticed each other. And then later on during that evening, during one of the other activities, we kind of started talking, and the rest is really history. So it's interesting that we met on the very first day of med school, and we're here now. So.
Wow.
And I say we actually both had come from the Maritime provinces, so the east coast of Canada. So we had that in common too.
Well, and the interesting thing too is, when we started to actually talk, a lot of some of the circles that we actually knew people in actually crossed. So we had some common ground, not only from where the geographic area we actually lived and grew up in, but also some of the people that we knew in those provinces. So it was kind of neat. It was obviously meant to be. So.
Yeah, exactly.
That's great. So go ahead. I just want to keep diving in.
Yeah, so do I. Because now you meet on the first day, and it sounds like there was at least some interest right away. But now you're also starting medical school, which is we can call it very time-consuming and overwhelming. And then you're starting a relationship. So how did you balance that out?
You know, being with Colin was a huge stabilizing factor for me because I'd been away from home. So actually, we both did our undergrad degrees living at home. So I had that support of family, plus just were able to focus more on school as opposed to, you know, trying to figure out all the other life stuff as well. So, so it was our first time, well, I guess you had been away, but really our first time living away. So it actually, it sounds like it would have been hard to balance that, but ended up being a really positive thing. And we had that common ground so we could support one another knowing what we were each going through. So we actually got married after second year too. So we, even though we did things a little unconventionally because we were still on the young side too. A lot of our classmates at that time were not getting married, and so yeah, it's obviously worked out.
It really worked out well that we spent so much time together. I mean,
Yeah.
we literally, you know, from what 8 o'clock in the morning till you know, we'd often study together after supper, and then I would go back to the place that I live. So we literally spent, you know, every day together for a significant chunk of the day, and it just really it worked for us. I know it doesn't work for all, but it certainly worked for us. So
I mean, it wasn't without his challenge.
It kind of makes sense though, because, and we talked about this with some other guests at times, is because medical school can be so all encompassing. The difference that with having another medical student as a companion or whatever is you guys understand. So it doesn't sound like there would have been the fights like, why are you spending so much time at school? So it's like, well, we have that test, we better study for it. So I think it's fascinating.
And then clerkship too, right? So there's that understanding there, whereas, you know, otherwise it may be difficult to understand why they're gone so frequently.
Yeah. Wondering where are you really at?
Yeah.
I'm sure those questions for non, you know, residents that could creep up, especially if they're used to a life before medical training or being in residency and then suddenly changes. I think it's hard for people to conceptualize the amount of internal stress when you want to perform and do well and impress upon people, and peer, kind of this unspoken peer pressure of always, you know, doing well in everything you're doing. I think it's just kind of the nature of the beast, unfortunately, which we know can have its untoward effects later on our psyche. But so speaking of which, when you were going through medical school, what were the fields? What did you both decide? How did you handle that?
You want to go first?
Well, yeah, so we have a couples match, which there is in the States as well. So that really factored into kind of some decision making because we definitely wanted to be in the same location. So that, not that it would have limited what we were applying for, but if you're both going for a very competitive specialty, you definitely have to factor that in. So I was pursuing family medicine, which, you know, would help because they need more people to be applying to family medicine as opposed to necessarily a specialty. And then you go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I initially went to medical school thinking that I wanted to be an orthopedic surgeon. And I, you know, coincidentally or ironically, I actually spent my kind of pre-med school day with an orthopedic surgeon and realized, maybe not. I enjoyed it, work, and I did some research in it, but it wasn't for me. So I'll be honest with you, I probably spent the next 2 to 3 years until we really started focusing on things, trying to figure out, there wasn't something that really grabbed me. I was more like what I didn't feel I wanted to do. And then I actually had a great experience with a consultation liaison psychiatrist, and that's actually what probably fostered my interest in going there. Fast forward ahead though, couples match, we get matched to Calgary, Alberta. I'm in psychiatry, and as part of that first year, I'd set up an elective in radiology. And the minute I went into radiology for that month, I knew that I wish I had known more about it going through the training. I fell in love with it. And by the end of that year, I'd already transferred in. So fast forward now, I've been a practicing radiologist for, you know, the better part of 17 years and absolutely love it. So that kind of gives you a little bit of idea of where we were and where we got to from that standpoint.
Yeah. So you ended up, you know, converting to the radiology and doing, so one of them's doing primary care. You end up doing the match, and did you go to the same place
Yeah.
for your training?
So we got into Calgary, Alberta. So now, so we started on the East Coast. We went to medical school in Ontario, which is kind of central-ish, although they'd say it's more east.
Yeah.
And then now we're, just to give you an idea, now we're out west. So
Gotcha.
we're in the prairies in Alberta. And so we really wanted to go to Calgary. We were very fortunate to get our choice, our top choice.
Yeah.
And so that would have been in 98 is when we started. And then in 99, again, against convention in some ways, not as unusual now, we had our first child.
Mm-hmm.
And so that would have been our second year of residency for both of us.
How'd that go?
Yeah.
You know what? It was actually extremely grounding and perspective, making for us. Because at the end of the day, it really forced us to actually keep work as much as we could at the hospital and come home and focus on something completely else. So it actually was probably one of the best decisions we made as far as being able to really add another level of perspective in our life and keep things going. And then to further that, in my last year, so I'm studying for my Royal College exam, we had our second child at that point in time. So it even further grounded us even more. And I have no regrets about doing that at any point in time. People still look at us now and they go, how did you guys manage to navigate all that? And again, it worked for us. I don't really have a great explanation for it, but it just worked.
We're not young, but we are 48 and 49, and our kids are 18 and 20, almost 21. So we're happy in some ways that we kind of went that route when we had the energy to be sleep deprived so much. So it was just a big combination of sleep deprivation. Not do it later.
Makes me laugh because the reason I'm so fascinated is my wife and I met in medical school as well, and we got married, and we had our first child during internship. And I distinctly remember thinking, it's like internship prepares you for having kids because but instead of being on call, Q2, Q3, Q4, you're on Q1 call with this baby all the time. But what I'm really kind of curious is, in the States, it really depends on your program, and a lot of times it depends on your specialty on how understanding the program is if you're having children. So in Canada, were you finding that your programs were supportive of this in Canadian medical system? Are they more protective of the residents and recognize that people are having kids, or do you find sometimes we were very lucky where I was, we didn't have this, but I know some people have had programs that are like, why are you having kids, and not being supportive. So
yeah, and we've heard that, but overall it's come a long way. Having kids in residency, because it was 99 when I had my son, in residency, and I only had 16 weeks off, and that was the max, and there was no parental leave. Or you might get a week off.
No, I didn't even get a week off. So they were kind of softer, if you will, around the time of delivery. So I had some leeway in my rotations, kind of the days heading up to it and a little bit after the fact, but I had no specific protected time or time off otherwise. So things have changed a lot.
Much better now.
There is both maternal and paternal leave up here within residency programs, and then adjustments are obviously made to make sure that you get the training that you kind of missed over the course of time. It's a different landscape now.
Yeah. It made me think, you were saying earlier about how it was really a great decision for you to have something to turn off from work and something non-medical. And, I almost, I think also, I guess this is my interpretation, because I'm married to someone who's not in the medical field, and I have this in my mind, this belief that it's good for me because it keeps me kind of dialed in with other things other than just medicine, and makes me more well-rounded. But I obviously think that's also part of personality and your intention of doing things outside. But I almost would think that, with two physicians, did you find that it was hard to turn off the medical mind? I mean, aside from children giving you another attention, I'm just curious, from two physicians, does it seem like it's hard to talk about other interests, or did you find, I'm just curious, did you always talk medicine all the time and that's most of your discussion, or what?
No, you know what? We actually, if you look over the course of our time, it's been lengthy. we don't tend to talk about medicine a lot, really.
Mhm.
We, really, when we're done, there might be that kind of quick, well, how was your day? Anything interesting? Kind of the usual small talk. But no, we purposely, or maybe not even purposely, just organically maybe happened that way, that we automatically started focusing on other things.
That's good.
I think that's probably where having kids in our training just allowed us to kind of springboard into practice and keep that same type of separation and perspective. So we kind of got on the ground running there. I mean, there's obviously been ups and downs with the practice and things that have taken up time, and we have consumed ourselves a little bit more, but overall we've been able to keep pretty grounded, I think, over the course of time. So
it's like
no, go ahead.
It's like any couple, probably, when you do have kids and you have family and life, you end up talking a lot about that. And I think talking about medicine was more talking about work, what you would do with a spouse, right? It's more about the work environment. Yeah.
So you're progressing here. You're done. You're doing your training. You're having kids. You move out into the early practice world, and how did that go? Was there any conflicts around it, or is Canadian medical system? Some of us in the United States are like, oh, if we only could practice in Canada, and other people are saying, oh, we can't practice in Canada. And more specifically, I would say is the burnout issue in the United States is pretty profound. However, having talked to other physicians in other countries, it seems like burnout is pretty universal, and everybody's doing this stuff. If I only can get to the United States, that's the land of bread and honey. If I can only get to Canada, that's the land where I'll have a work day that won't consume me. So what were your experiences with early practice, and can you tell the listeners, particularly those who are maybe in the United States or in a different country, what is it really like to practice medicine in Canada?
The grass isn't necessarily greener, is kind of what you're getting at, right?
Yeah.
So you can
Want me to start? Yeah. So we actually went back to the Maritimes after Calgary. So we were back in Prince Edward Island specifically. I had agreed to go back kind of on a contract to, service type of thing for a period of time. And as far as things went, I went into a practice that was understaffed, and we had a whole bunch of problems from, basically that shortage that really bled into the 5 years that we were there. And to be honest with you, it really, I had so much anticipation and hope that things would be so great there and we'd be able to get more people, and it just never panned out. So we probably started planning even an extra strategy in the Maritimes at, probably midway, maybe the 3 to 4 year mark, thinking of where else might we be able to go. Again, hoping that maybe the grass is greener somewhere else in Canada. But, again, that's kind of what my experience was, that I loved doing radiology, but I didn't love how I was having to do it. And that was probably the driving force for me to want to look elsewhere. And I mean, Sarah had a little bit of a different experience in family medicine, but if you want to share that.
Yeah, but I never kind of found exactly what I wanted to do. I did so many different things, and I think it was just kind of diversifying to kind of keep it a little more interesting and exciting. So, from having my own practice to working at a student health center at the university, working in administrative position for Veterans Affairs. I kind of, during this 5 year time. So there was nothing that was really calling me that I was very passionate about at that time. So we were really happy there in terms of our life and friendships and the community, but we're growing more and more discontent with kind of the healthcare system we're working in.
And that's really kind of interesting, because if burnout is again pretty universal across medicine, but in the United States specifically, what we're seeing is those in primary care tend to have the highest rates of burnout. And yet, Colin, you're a radiologist, so in the United States we don't see that as much, and you're under this kind of, you're started seeing that the threads in the picture here, where things are sort of falling apart. So could you kind of explore that a little bit as a specialist? Because in the United States, again, specialty would be like, they're almost protected in a lot of ways. Still hard work, still a lot of complaints, but it's not necessarily the same.
Yeah, and I think for those first 5 years of practice, burnout wasn't an issue for me at that point in time. It was probably just more, again, discontentment of how I was having to practice radiology. Being that chronically short-staffed, The days were a little bit longer. There's probably a bit more volume of work, but I didn't really feel overwhelmed to the sense of the point where I was feeling burnt out. I just knew that long term, that wasn't kind of the practice that I envisioned for myself. So I was kind of hoping to get into a practice where I wasn't, we weren't short staffed, and again, a little bit more of how I wanted to practice. So those early years, the burnout piece kind of comes into the next chapter of things, of where we really tried to, again, come up with a plan that would help us with that. But those first 5 years for me was more about just discontentment, to be honest with you.
You might want to get into chapter 2 so you can explore.
Yeah, go ahead.
Burnout to answer that question. Yeah.
So we actually, training in Calgary, we had a lot of connections, obviously, still out in Western Canada. So there was a couple of people that I knew that were actually practicing just north of Calgary in Alberta. And just through even just a social interaction, we kind of got talking about maybe the possibility of us actually, moving out there and me joining their practice. So that actually came to fruition over the course of we did a cross-country move. I got the call, I think it was probably the third week of June in 2008. And by August 21st, we were in Alberta with our family, ready to practice for September 1st. So it came very quickly. So we made the move out to Alberta, and again, to a practice that actually, at face value, gave me everything initially that the other practice didn't. So it was really working out well kind of in that first couple of years or so. But then unfortunately, the volume, the demands, everything else just became progressively more and more. And we were in Alberta for 9 years, but really those last 3 through 9 years, it was a bit of a struggle. I started to notice that I was really, again, dreading going to work. Wasn't sure, had really no control or flexibility over my day. And that's when I think we started to piece things together, that I was probably starting to burn out at that point in time. So, and that's too where Sara, she was pursuing some interest in physician wellness, kind of as an adjunct to what, she was doing from a clinical standpoint. And that helped kind of put the pieces together. So,
yeah, because you would initially think radiology doesn't seem like a profession that would have burnout, kind of to your point, but the way he was working, he had no control over the volume of work he had to do in a day, how he had to do it, where he did it even, what modality it was. So the lack of control was definitely there. Definitely, there was not a lot of autonomy, and there was no flexibility. So if he was working, guaranteed I had to be flexible in terms of the family outside of that. They were a very busy practice. They believed in working hard and playing hard, so that when you worked, you were all in. But that, again, leads to those other kind of, there was no balance.
Well, that it's not sustainable. You can't work hard and play hard and sustain it. There needs to be some level of moderation. And that's what, even with the time off that I had, I just found that I could never recuperate. I go back, I could be off for a couple of weeks, say in the summer, I go back, and after the first day, it was almost like, did I even have any vacation? I almost feel like I was back to square one. So,
yeah, it's interesting because that lack of autonomy is another thing that we kind of see across pictures when it comes to physician practice. Anyway, is you just feel like a cog, like no control. And it's just like now you're just like this assembly line kind of thing, trying to do something that has really important and meaning to those on the back end, the patients, and yet we as a cog in this wheel really can't feel like this, we're being able to practice effectively and or do what we need to do effectively and actually have a life and treat our families well at the same time. So that is really interesting, and I hope people again recognize that if you're hoping to move somewhere else for a magical cure, maybe we should start with our own practices and our own choices first. So interesting.
Yeah. So being that you're coming to this realization of loss of autonomy and all these things that, we've been talking about, what were your thoughts or conversations around this, and what to go forth doing at that point?
Yeah. So I think at that point, I probably really truly sat down and reflected on myself, and then in consultation with Sara, we go for walks and we go for our daily walks. That's often usually our brainstorming kind of debriefing. but at the end of the day, I wanted to hopefully come up with a path that would give me the autonomy, the control, and the flexibility that I felt I had lost very quickly in that practice. So probably to get to where we are here in Victoria, to give you an idea, in Vancouver Island, it was a 4-year plan, just given everything, our jobs, our kids' schooling, everything. So, you know, we're looking back, we got here in 2017. So in 2013, this is when we started doing our master plan. And we started looking at places that, one, we'd like to live, but two, where I might be able to actually get a job that would give me those three things. So those ended up being the pillars or the cornerstones of what I wanted for myself to try and find. So that's what we started doing, was basically coming up with a roadmap of how we could actually plan this and execute it. And we fortunately were able to. I actually transitioned in that last year of practice in Alberta. I started working as a teleradiologist to see if it was something that was actually feasible to bridge that gap and maybe pick up long-term as a transition. And shortly after starting it, I realized that I think this actually would really work well for me all over across the board. And it's given me all three of those things that I felt that I lost. And I can't thank, you know, the stars enough that it actually has worked out this way. I've always loved doing radiology in both those places. It was how I had to do it. And now it's back to the point where I actually love how I'm doing it right now. So it's made a huge difference. It's brought back that joy in medicine to me that I knew was there, but was kind of tarnished for a bit. So that's kind of where I am now.
And Sarah, what kind of felt like the transition for you, and then how did you all merge that in what you're doing now?
Well, and I just want to say too, like we always say, it's, you know, not everything is straightforward, and you have to give something to take something. So certainly moving and making that transition, we were giving away a security too of being a part of him being a partner, a big difference in income. So it came, but we had to look at what was most important, and, you know, health, personal health, and emotional well-being, and all those things end up being top, and the family. So for me, I really enjoyed what I was doing. I was kind of more doing sexual health, and I was doing some physician health stuff too, but it wasn't like what I was doing was going to kind of sustain us anyway. So when we moved, I decided it was time for me to really not just do something because this is the way you do things if you're a family doctor, and just kind of really trying to, what we say is, design our own life. So what I'd always wanted to pursue was something in medical education. And so I kind of got the ball rolling with that. And so now that I'm doing some sessional work with the medical school, and just kind of being able to do other things I've, you know, always been interested in, just some hobbies, creative endeavors. We still try to do, you know, some work, just some advocacy, if you will, on social media. Initially, we had a website, and we were kind of doing more, but we're just trying to figure out what would work best, what we have the energy for, the passion for. So yeah, we just feel like we can do more of the things that maybe just we really do want to do, because sometimes I think you end up down a path of not really thinking about it and just not being intentional, and we're just trying to really be intentional about what we do and how we live our life.
Yeah, no, I think that's part of what we did, was we tried to leverage our MDs into maybe an unconventional path that actually got us where we wanted to be. And that's the part where, you know, it's not impossible, it can be done. You just kind of have to be open. And it, you know, yeah, as Sarah said, it was a little bit unnerving at certain points, some of the things we were giving up, but you know, some of the things in life that are, you know, they're worth fighting for, and we're happy that it worked out this way. So
well, and it's interesting because you know, you gained a level of awareness that there was an issue, and then rather than just sort of, you know, reacting to it, which happens to all of us at some point in time, we're just kind of almost like you're swimming in drowning in water and just trying to keep your head up or whatever, but you got your head up enough that you were aware. And I love how you're using that intentionality, because you were very intentional in your choices, where you're wagering, yeah, you may lose partnership, but if you're gaining a quality of life. And for me, and I think we've talked about this quite a bit, Melissa, is when you make these active choices, you may find your income drop, but your lifestyle changes, and now you may be able to sustain that practice. It's rather than killing yourself for 15 years doing the, work hard, play hard, get your 2 weeks off here and there, but you're just dying every day, is, well, maybe you're going to practice for 25 years now, but you're going to do it in a way that you enjoy what you do and you enjoy the life you're living. So it's just, I love hearing those words of awareness and intentionality and seeing how intentional you were through that process.
And to speak to, that's exactly what I did was, look, why am I actually trying to cram, so much work into a shorter period of time? Why can't I just spread it out, the work and the money over the time, have a better quality of life over 20 years as opposed to grinding it out for 10, all those things. And that's part of where, even as part of the move here, again, intention and purpose was, let's find out what the numbers are. Let's find out what the numbers are for us to sustain things. And that's even been a bit of a driving force, is to being able to allow us to actually feel like we can pursue some of the interests that we have, as opposed to feel like, well, no, we don't have time for it because we have to work. So it's really allowed us that, again, flexibility to maybe not always say yes to something, say no to something, create some boundaries with things. And it's really been quite a journey, but it's,
And now,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, with COVID, I mean, we felt very fortunate that Colin was already set up working. There was obviously a bit of a slowdown because of radiology, because less emerge visits, that sequence of events, essential services were kind of on hold. But, for both of us, it didn't really, now we're teaching on Zoom. And so just kind of fortunate that we were already a little bit set up for that transition as well. It just happened that way.
So can you paint that picture a little bit more graphically? And what is it that you guys are doing now as compared to before? What is your day-to-day life like? How is your practice? Where are you generating your income and finding your time and things like that?
Yeah, so I only work nights now. So what I do is I kind of take benefit of a time shift. I report for other parts of the country. So basically I work either between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. or 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. my time. So I've got my full, I get up about 9:30 or so, for example. I give myself a little bit of sleep, and then I've got my full day to do pretty much whatever I want with the family, whether it be errands. As I say, we try to go on a daily walk. We try and eat fresh every day, so there's a lot of errands that involve us going to the grocery store and getting some fresh stuff to prepare. So it's allowed me to basically have my days. I know it wouldn't be for everybody, but that was always part of my favorite time of working, was night on call, because the hospital, or at least the radiology department, was almost to myself. So it's kind of selfishly, I kind of like it here now, in the sense I've got things to myself again. But that's kind of what my day looks like. And
well, he has a whole
I got a workstation beside
whole
me.
Workstation, so to read remotely, and works for a company, and also does administrative work for the company too. That does contract out to some hospitals, maybe smaller hospitals that don't want to have 24/7 coverage for radiology, and so it's a very symbiotic relationship. So that's kind of, he's working a lot less than he was.
I'm essentially half time, really. If you look at the number of hours that I work, which again, being able to work half time, have my days, and still feel that I can make enough money for us to live the way that we do. Again, it's a gift, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and I'm doing some work with the UBC Medical School, and so I practiced for 17 years in one capacity or another, and then when we moved here, that was kind of the decision point, because I'm sure it's similar in the States. You have to have licenses and memberships, and the cost adds up to quite a lot, and your liability insurance. So there has to be a level of commitment at how much I want to work. And it's still, even within provinces, as it would be within this different states, it's different practicing in each province. So that's when I made a decision, kind of came to a decision, not easily, that I probably wasn't going to get a license to practice, but a license to do medical education. and I really enjoy what I'm doing, like really enjoy it. So
it's interesting. It's one of the things she always wanted to do, but it was quite a leap to kind of hang up the clinical license to actually pursue that dream. But I don't think you'd look back on it and regret anything about it.
And based on where we live too, there was a barrier to being able to do it. So just where we lived, it just
in Alberta, she didn't have that option to do medical education from where we live. So.
And I'm curious, are you doing telemedicine, or not telemedicine, but are you doing remote work, Sara, with this right now, or are you now?
With COVID.
With COVID.
Yeah, it's there's no in-person classes.
Okay.
Both of our kids even, are starting first and fourth year science at the university, all remote. Okay. So everything is remote. So I'm doing small group work, and it's all remote right now. So we'll see where that all goes.
Yeah, you're both remote right now.
Yeah, we're the whole family. So it's interesting to see how it goes, because everyone likes to kind of get out and do their own thing too. So it's a challenge. Everyone's experiencing a challenge in this time, but
sure. Yeah. Well, I wanted to give props for the Instagram. I mean, that's where I found you, and you have a lot of inspirational pictures and quotes, and I noticed Brene Brown was one of the quotations on there, and have some really good discussion on some of those images or posts that you do. And I noticed you had a link to, of course, this is the Change Physician podcast, and you have a link to the Change Catalyst to help people that are trying to design their own lives and change. And do you want to speak to that a little bit, where that came about?
Right. How about this? It was kind of our brainchild, in the sense of I help her with a lot of the brainstorming, and then she puts a lot of the ideas to paper. So, so it probably over the course of time was just, we had a bit of a story to tell and share, and shared experience, I think, for a lot of us is very important. So we just basically tried to create a bit of a roadmap of even some of the things we discussed about here today, of what we did to kind of take control of our situation and be kind of the drivers of the change that we wanted to be and see. So that's really where it came from, was the hopes for that. So
I had a blog actually way back 2013, I guess, is when I had started, and that's when I got into wellness, and that's, as Colin had mentioned, I started to get into physician wellness and started to piece together burnout. So I started on social media then, and then we wanted to do something together. So then we started the website. It was Physicians for Physicians, and started like Docs for Docs on Instagram and Twitter. And just, we've kept up. We actually started working on the Change Catalyst through what we ended up writing about, blogging about, once I stopped my own personal one, and we're doing it together. So we just tried to put together everything we feel we kind of learned along the way, in terms of personal development and growth.
Well, I think the important thing is, it's not like we're saying that the Change Catalyst has all the answers, but it certainly, sheds some light on what worked for us. And I think that's what we were hoping for. Even if somebody, one person finds that it helped them, then that's a win. So,
it's like what you guys are doing. We learn a lot from other people's stories, and can maybe see some parts in ourselves.
And it's, I think that's important too, because I don't know what the discussion exactly is in Canada about burnout, but in the United States, they'll say, oh, physician burnout's a big problem. But when you look at these healthcare systems and entities, their response to that is it's like, go do yoga. And, all these very reactive things where they're not addressing these core issues of lack of autonomy, feelings where you have no control over the outcomes, no control of your practice. And me being me, and I will try not to be too down on the healthcare system, I honestly think that the systems themselves don't want us to know. Like, it makes more sense for them to do these reactive kind of strategies, but it's up to the physicians, like what you're doing, where you're saying, you can choose, you can make active choices, you can be intentional in your lifestyle design, because we're the ones who are directly impacted by that, right? And so I love that you're doing it, because I don't really think that anybody other than physicians are going to be the ones that really lead this change, that help their peers, that provide these resources. So I really applaud you on that, and thank you so much for putting that resource out there.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know you have done, at least it seems like there's been some things you've made offerings or retreats or some. Is there anything that's going on right now, or anything you want to put attention to, or is that kind of not an active area right now?
It's not an active area right now. We kind of, over the course of the last year or so, we've kind of decided to, focus again, what is our intention and purpose and direction with things. Mm-hmm. And I think at that point, when we realized that, transitioning into keeping those things going, I mean, obviously mm-hmm. COVID's come, and it would have probably thrown a wrench into a lot of those things anyway, the in-person stuff. We just felt that maybe stepping back and being more of the advocacy side of things, and kind of just sharing our story bit by bit through some of our social media stuff is what we wanted to do at this point in time. Is it not, is it something that we might get back to at some point in time? We may, but at this point, that's the part, I guess, we never sit here and just accept the status quo. So there's a lot of ebb and flow in what we do. And right now we've chosen to kind of focus on the advocacy through social media. So.
And if anyone ever contacts us, like, we're always happy to speak with anyone that's happened to. Just, we're not doing or any of our work, or never have, in physician wellness as a money generator. It's just a true interest in what we've gone through and our experience in knowing how significant it can be, and it can impact a family, someone's personal health, that we just want to be there if we can in any way.
Support, right?
Yeah, exactly.
We've always said that we're always here to help support people. So if we're able to talk to somebody about things and shed some light, or some, ways that they can handle it, we're here for them. So.
Well, I just love the team approach that both of you have with this, and I think it gives people hope. And even if you're dropping a little bit of knowledge here and there, it is a contribution, and it can be magnified on social media. You never know how that can impact people. But what I love is that you're open to change, and you're open to facing whatever discomforts are right in front of your face, and willing to discuss them. And you've evidently had a really good communication, from what I can tell, between the two of you. And even just taking walks together, what an amazing mental and physical gift to each other, for not only being role models for your children, but to enhance and nurture your own relationship. And I think that ends up benefiting the rest of the world, to see that kind of example, because it's a lot of personal development and inner work that is really tough, and there is no perfect, cookie cutter approach, and you're going to have to piece your own life together and design it the way that fits you. So thank you for all you're doing.
Well, thank you for saying that.
Kevin, any other questions?
I was just going to ask you, so where can people find you? What are the best sites for people to find you at?
Right now, it would be Twitter still, at docs4docs. It's a letter 4. And I think on Instagram it's F4. So we're docs4docs. Am I wrong on that? On Instagram.
DOCS, the number 4, DOCS.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
One of those things you kind of forget, right?
That's okay.
I wasn't going to correct her on that.
Yeah, sorry.
It's all good. We put you on the spot. It's all good.
I'm thinking of our email, and we can always be reached by email.
Yeah.
And that's on your Instagram notes at the top. So for your profile.
Exactly.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I, just like Melissa, want to say thank you so much for coming on the Change Physician podcast. Love hearing your story. Loved, these points about awareness and intentionality. And I particularly enjoyed, because again, in the United States, we have all these specialties, and the specialists sometimes get pigeonholed in thinking that they can't take control of their life. So, Colin, thank you so much for demonstrating that even those in these specialties can make intentional choices to change their lives and their practice. Really appreciate you coming on the show today.
Thank you so
Thanks
much
so much for having
us.
us. It was our pleasure.
Yeah, it was really enjoyable.
And for everybody else out there, I am Dr. Kevin Cuccaro with my co-host, Dr. Melissa Cady. Thank you for joining us today on the Change Physician podcast, and we will see you all soon.